So, welcome. uh, the ground rules for virtual meetings, probably everyone's been on enough of those by now. Stay muted and cameras off unless you're going to speak. And I think I'm not sure that I can see the chat while I'm presenting, so let's wait for the break at around 10. Feel free to put questions in the chat and we'll address them at the break. So I'm going to kind of go over the Be WisWise outreach program, the WisWise incentives part of that, the status of the program. We're going to cover forms and procedures, then take a break, then come back and get into the specifications for woodland resource action plans, which are what we call our stewardship level plans, and then a little Q&A, and hopefully at that point we can wrap it up. So any questions, though, on the agenda? I think if you unmute and just say something, that should work. Okay. Hearing none, there we go. And hopefully you all see the next screen, kind of an overview of Be WisWise and WisWise incentives and of the Maine Forest Service. As some of you may not quite know, we have 3 divisions in the Maine Forest Service. One is forest protection. That's our the forest rangers, the folks that fight the fire. They do some law enforcement. Our forest health and monitoring, that's the bug lab with the entomologists. We have a forest pathologist who's a good resource for, what's wrong with my tree type questions. And that division also does forest inventory and analysis of measurements of permanent plots, sort of on contract to the U.S. Forest Service. So forest policy and management, which is where I work and where the district foresters work, which includes Dan and Alyssa and Jim, who are on the call here. They're part of a field team of 10 district foresters, a couple of what we call regional enforcement coordinators, and then there's Augusta staff, which is where I come in. We provide a fair amount of landowner assistance and information. We have publications, presentations. We put on workshops, generally try to do those live and in person up until this year. We're still working our way through doing a lot of them virtually. One key component are woodlot visits with individual landowners. Some of you may already be aware of that. We call those walk and talks. Very often that is a key activity to help answer landowner questions and help them to determine what their next step is in the stewardship of their land. We answer questions by email and phone. Everybody does. That's what I do primarily. And we make referrals to private licensed foresters, which is where you folks come in by virtue of taking this training. And if you choose to sign a stewardship forester agreement, you'll be on our stewardship forester list, which is essentially our statewide referral list for private consultants who work with small family woodland owners. Here's just a few of the resources, some pages that you may want to bookmark or become familiar with. We have a woodland owners page, which has a lot of continuing links to other resources. The Find Your Local District Forester page is very useful. Anybody can type in a town where their woodlot is and get the contact information for the district forester that covers that town. As I mentioned, our stewardship forester referral list is online. We actually also have a map function that goes with that, so that you can kind of zoom in on a part of the state and see the business locations of the foresters on the list. And the Be WisWise web page, which would be very important if you're participating in the program or your clients are. A lot of these forms and things that we're going to talk about are located there. And we're going to look at that a little more closely in a minute. Just want to give a brief history of our landowner assistance. There's been federal legislation since at least the mid-90s authorizing states to do this type of work. There's been an alphabet soup over the years of programs. and I probably don't even know what they all stand for, but I think it was Forest Incentives Program, Stewardship Incentives Program, Forest Stewardship Assistance, Forest Land Enhancement Program, perhaps. The FSP is currently an authorized program as the Forest Stewardship Program, and that's the source for the funds for my position and for these the contribution we make to the reimbursement for the management plans. In 2004, Maine Forest Service sort of went through an exercise, a branding exercise, and came up with the term Be Woodswise, which is trademarked, and the Woodswise incentives. The idea was to not have to make people figure out the alphabet soup, and they could just think of it as Woodswise. And we maintain that brand to this day. And even though some of those programs no longer are funded, whatever funding sources we have that come in the back door to the world, particularly to the world of woodland owners, we just call it Woodswise. And at one time, in 2004, when this was started up, the chief components of the cost sharing were comprehensive multi-purpose management plans and practice implementation. About 2008, when the FLEP program was zeroed out by the federal government, that was our money to help implement practices, so we stopped doing that then. 2009, there was a steep cut in the funds for the Forest Stewardship Program, which caused us to put a moratorium on the plans we were cost sharing. Back then, we were sharing at a 75% reimbursement rate. We revised our plans, plan specs, essentially came up with something that met stewardship requirements and some other requirements, but without an inventory required. Our 2004 plans did require a formal inventory. So we were able to reduce the cost of these plans and therefore stretch the dollars we had a little further, and we went to a 50% reimbursement, which is where we still are. 2016, we did a fairly major revision on the RAP specs, and those are the specs we'll be talking about today, the current ones. A lot of that was based on feedback from the field, particularly from our district foresters. Program status over the past few years, it's still been a little bit up and down, although the ups and downs haven't been as big as they were in 2009. You could say that overall things are essentially flat. 2020 was a little over the 18 and 19. We don't yet know what we're beginning for 2021, but the way these grants work, our 2020 allocation should carry us through the first half of 2021, which means we can keep on accepting applications as we have. However, we always have to say this, the program prospects are uncertain, depends on what the federal government and the U.S. Forest Service does with respect to the Forest Stewardship Program. But as I said, we're still good for the first half of 2021 as we have been going. Always like to thank folks who are out there helping landowners, whether you write a lot of plans, whether the plans you write are done with or without cost sharing. Recognizing that stewardship is more than just a government program. It's for a lot of folks, it's a core part of why they're foresters or their forestry business. A fact that only about 25 to 30% of landowners involve a licensed forester when they're implementing their plans, that is to say harvesting. Definitely room to improve on that, and we hope that through many activities that we get more forester involvement at the time of harvest. And stewardship in general, if this is the first time you'll hear me say it, probably won't be the last. It's a path of many steps, forest management plans being one of those steps. The Woodswise incentives information is on the Woodswise incentives webpage. So there's sort of the steps to get there, and there's the URL. And even if this doesn't make it into the recording, I can certainly make this whole PowerPoint available online. So you'll have this if you want it. Here's a screenshot of that page. Not sure if you get to see my cursor or not, but you'll just notice that on the right-hand side, this menu here has pretty much all the forms that you will need, or you or your clients will need, and we're going to go through a lot of those. You notice here it says Manual of Policies, Procedures, and Specifications. Once upon a time, we printed all this out and gave everybody paper copies. We haven't done that in quite a while. But this is kind of a go-to for a lot of questions, and we will keep the website up to date. So as you'll hear me say a lot of times, if you haven't used a form for a while, go to the website and make sure that you get the most recent, say, application form, or on the other side of things when people are claiming their reimbursements. And you'll notice that the specifications are on there. I just kind of moved to the lower part of the page. There's other things that are linked from that page. There's an information sheet about the incentives program that you may find useful to help explain it to your clients. We do post the information from our Stewardship Forester annual meetings. I should say that is part of the program. As far as you guys are concerned, we'll hold a meeting every year. Typically, we've held 3 in-person meetings, kind of north, central, and south part of the states. If you consider Bangor to be north, that's about as far north as we go. Bangor, Augusta, and Scarborough have been our in-person locations. This year, we didn't do that. We held 1 virtual meeting. Not sure how things will be looking in the spring. Quite likely, we will still be doing some virtual meetings. During those meetings, besides going over program stuff, we like to provide other content, reports about the latest on, say, insects and diseases, or what's happening with invasive plants, or so on and so forth. And all that information gets posted, so you always have that as something to look back to, even if you weren't able to attend the meeting. So I'm not going to spend too much more time on that page. I'm going to jump right in. This is actually part of, I'll back up 1 second here. This is going to be excerpts from section 1 of the manual, which is the introduction to the program and general requirements. And I'm not going through the whole manual, just sort of key points. So eligibility for landowners, types of ownership. It must be private individuals, persons, companies, or other entities that hold title to the land and the timber. That can include joint owners and tenants in common groups, associations, corporations, Indian tribes, other native groups, other private legal entities, family LLCs, things of that nature. Corporations that with stocks that are publicly traded are not eligible. Also, owners, if they're principally engaged in the processing of wood products from their ownership, in other words, if it's a, forest industry, they are not eligible. And if it's a situation where the ownership of the timber is different from the ownership of the land, they are not eligible. Also want to point out that quasi-municipal entities such as utility districts, water sewer districts, and town-owned land are not eligible for WoodsWise, but they're encouraged to apply to a separate program that we have called Project Canopy. That is administered by Jan Santerre, our urban and community forestry specialist, and it's a whole different breed of cat. If anybody's working with an ownership like that, you can contact me and I'll get you connected to Jan to find out more about how that works. It is possible to get help with forest management plans through that, and those management plans are going to really look an awful lot like stewardship plans. And if there's any specific question, if you're talking to a landowner and you're not sure if their status qualifies, feel free to give me a call or have them give me a call or send me an email and we'll figure it out. All right, continuing the eligibility, there's acreage limitations. The applicants have to have at least a 10 contiguous forest acre parcel, but no more than 1,000 total forested acres statewide. So in the case of the minimum, that's got to be on the parcel in question. And in case of the maximum, that's all their wooded acres statewide, even if it's in multiple parcels. At one time, we were able to issue a waiver for folks with more than 1,000 acres, up to 5,000. But again, when our funding was cut back, obviously those tend to be larger plans. We had to stop doing that back in 2015. Part of eligibility, landowners will have to sign a pledge to maintain their plans and practices for a minimum of 10 years. That pledge is considered part of the plan. If during the 10 years, for some reason, they completely ignore what's in their plan, we do have the ability to ask for recapture of the some or all of the amount that we invested in that plan. This rarely happens, by the way, and we don't spend a lot of time looking for it to happen, but it has happened in the past. Section 2 of that manual essentially is the planning menu. There's only 2 items on that we're actually accepting applications for at the moment. This is what the menu looks like. We left a number of these things on the menu just in case someday maybe we'll have more money and we can open things up. Those code FMP 1As and 1Bs referred to those original plans that had inventories as part of their specs. As I said, we're not funding those now, so don't check those boxes. In fact, the current application doesn't even have those boxes on it. We can fund something called an amendment of an existing forest management plan. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. But primarily, what folks are doing these days are what we're calling FMP 5A and 5B. The A and B simply refers to the acreage. Woodland Resource Action Plans, otherwise known as RAPs. That's just the terminology we came up with for the plans that were cost sharing. The five A's are woodlots with 10 to 50 wooded acres. 5B would be 51 and greater. As I said, max is at 1,000. The reimbursement rate is 50% of actual cost, with a not to exceed of $250 on the smaller lots and $5 per wooded acre on the larger lots. So I'm just going to talk briefly about the amendment. Very few people take advantage of this. I guess it doesn't quite fit for a lot of folks, but it's there, and we want you to know that for anybody who already has an existing stewardship level plan and needs to amend it for some reason, we can offer a little bit of cost share to assist with that. The amendment is doesn't have to be as extensive as that original plan. We'll consider one of these per 12-month period for an existing plan, and that's as long as the existing plan is still active, which means the planning period of 10 years or more has not expired. I should mention now, and I'll mention again, that if somebody's in year 9 of their previous plan and they want to just go ahead and do a new full bore plan, we can accept that application. That doesn't have to be an amendment because it probably shouldn't be. It should be a full next plan. When it comes to amendments, we do have to have them meet a set of minimum specifications, but we can be a little bit flexible as to what those specifications are. Again, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this right now, but just know that there are different ways to sort of expand the reach of one of our plans, Woodland Resource Action Plans. I'm just going to back up for a second to point out that for those amendments, the reimbursement rate is 50% with a not to exceed of 150, and that's per amendment regardless of the size of the woodlot. Okay. So moving into the forms themselves. This is the application form that a landowner fills out and sends in here to Augusta. We now have them as fillable PDFs. We're gradually making things more and more electronic, although we're not completely there yet. They're fillable, I don't believe they're savable. No, I guess they must be, because people do save them and send them to me. So they're fillable and savable. And if you have the ability to sign them electronically, you can do that. Otherwise, you may have to print them out and get a signature on them. Not sure if that, whoops. Yeah, not able to show the signature line down below, but it does need to be signed. A couple things about these applications. We're really looking for one landowner name or an entity name at the top, and that has to correspond to that person or entity's tax ID. In the case of a joint ownership, please list the rest of the owners down here. A lot of times if I see like two names up above, and it could be a husband and wife, could be brother and sister, father and son, or what have you. If I see two names there and only one tax ID, I'll need to call up and find out whose tax ID that is, whose social security number. Or if there's two names and two numbers, I need to know who the primary is. We don't like to hang on to social security numbers, so this form is used to set up people as a vendor in the state system. Once that happens, we black out the social security or the tax ID number on this form so that we're not keeping it in our records. However, we do need it initially in order to get that setup done. Because eventually a paper check is the most common way that landowners get their reimbursement. And even if it's a direct deposit, it still has to run through the state accounting system. So that's a little thing to look out for. We need the town name of the nearest all-weather road, or the county it's in. A lot of people are not 100% sure about this, and they may leave out one of these. We do need to know total acres of the tract, total or the estimated forested acres on that parcel, and then the total wooded acres owned in Maine. You can check off whether it's an individual, joint, nonprofit, company, or business without publicly traded stock, or some other type of ownership. Here's the boxes for the type of plan. As I mentioned, the 5A for 10 to 50 wooded acres, 5B for 50 and above, and the FMP2 for an amendment. Down this part here, the landowner does need to have a stewardship forester lined up. If we don't see a name here, I will call up and say, who's your stewardship forester? So since you folks will be the stewardship foresters, make sure that your clients put your name, once you've agreed that you're going to write this plan for them, pending approval, make sure that your name and license number are on the application. And then the other question asks whether or not this woodlot has had any cost sharing before. A lot of people get the WoodsWise program and the tree growth tax law confused, and they think that they got a WoodsWise plan when they got a tree growth plan, but that's okay. We figure it out. The fine print down here is some IRS language that allows this form to be the vendor setup, as I mentioned. So that's why it's in there. And by signing this and sending it in, that allows that landowner to be set up in the state system so that we can issue them that reimbursement. Now on the web, on that web page that I showed before, we do have a set of landowner instructions. We don't automatically send these to landowners, but they're there, and they again can help you in explaining the program to your clients. They basically pick up from the point where the application's been approved, the plan's been written, and you present it to your client. Basically, we're suggesting that they they're your customer. They should read the plan, make sure that they understand it, that it accurately reflects their objectives, and that the recommendations meet their goals and needs. And at the point where they accept the plan, then they make sure they sign that stewardship pledge, which should be part of the plan. They need to pay you first, and then the stewardship forester there's paperwork, some of which needs to be completed by the landowner, some by the stewardship forester and the landowner, and one piece is just for the stewardship forester. So that's the pieces that come afterwards. Rather than talk about them here, I'll wait till we talk about the individual pieces of paper. But a lot of things are explained in one document here called Landowner Instructions. So this is the form used for claim for payment. And again, this is after the plan's written and the landowner says, yep, this plan works. And it's time to send a copy of the plan into the local district forester along with this paperwork. This is needed for first the district forester and then myself to process. And this particular form carries through and becomes sort of like an invoice to request the reimbursement payment. So one thing that often slows down progress, you'll notice that it asks for the payee name, essentially the landowner name and address. If this is different than what was on that application form, then we're going to have a problem because the state system is going to have it set up with a certain name, a certain tax ID, and a certain address. If it looks different here, we need to figure out why. Most typically, somebody who's in Maine for the summer and they're somewhere else for the winter, they apply under one address, but by the time they're making their claim for reimbursement, they're in the other address. It's fixable, but it takes another form. So if that's really truly the case, then landowners need to fill out a new vendor form essentially, and it's just a delay. So to the best of everybody's abilities, figure out where the landowner will be living when the plan is done and reimbursement is happening, and use that address on the application form as well. Sorry, it went a little too far. The claim for payment, the upper part above the line needs to be filled out by the landowner. A lot of times you as stewardship foresters are assisting in this, so make sure that that it's complete. It includes the number of acres, the date the plan's prepared, the town. There is a place for a landowner's signature. By the way, this is our most current version, and it will say, well, sorry, guess this is not, because this says December 2018. I forgot to change out the slide. All right. If you go to the website itself, you'll see one from August 2020 that is a little more up to date. And I think the change we made is we made the landowner signature box fillable as well. That way it can be signed electronically.
Andy, is this form sent to the district forester after the plan is approved or before the plan is approved?
It's sent after the plan is done, but before approval. So this is along with the plan for approval. I mean, typically. Okay. Typically. Now, in some cases, and actually we encourage that folks writing the plan, their first plan, that maybe there's a little back and forth with the district forester first, just to make sure that it's all complete. And then once that's all set, then you can send in the rest of the paperwork. But once you've kind of got this down and you're pretty sure you've sent in a complete plan, you can send this and a couple other pieces right along with, or make sure that your clients are sending them sort of simultaneously. The district foresters won't be able to go further even after they reviewed and approved. They're going to need all these forms, the after plan forms, so that they can sign off on them and send them to me, so that as I said, typically you send in a plan and you send these other forms right along with. Does that answer your question, John?
Oh, that was me, Tyler. That
Sorry,
does answer
Tyler.
my question.
Yeah,
No
I
worries.
can't see the screen, so I was.
Yeah. As
really,
a follow-up, I know that you said that there's the landowner instructions on that website, but I think, looking at the process so far, depending on how, go get it you are about it, it may be a different time frame. But roughly, what is the time frame to get this plan completed, or once we've submitted it, how long does it take before they see payment? That's a common question.
Okay. Well, the answer. So I should back up and say though that when an application is approved, you and your client, you have 12 months to complete the plan and get it into the district forester, and you can request 1 3-month extension on that if you need it. But now you're talking about once the plan's complete and you send everything into the district forester. District foresters have a lot on their plate. Different ones work it different ways. Some folks take it first as soon as it comes in. Some people batch it up a little bit. We hope that they're all as timely as possible. Any district forester want to jump in and say how you handle that?
I had a comment here, Andy.
Go ahead, Dan.
So this is Dan. And what I was told by a supervisor many years ago that I've tried to continue to follow is when we get these plans, when they land on our desk and we first see them, we need to have them reviewed within a 2-week period. And I don't know if that's still the case, but that's what I was told early on in my career, and that's what I've tried to follow. And before all the issues with COVID arose, I always found that our turnaround time was pretty quick, with the district foresters approving the plans and then sending the paperwork to Augusta and a check being issued or a payment being made. I've always found a turnaround time was really quick compared to some other programs with other government agencies that are out there. And I think with COVID, the district foresters are not in their offices as much because of that. So it may be good if you mail a plan to our office to maybe send the forester an email to let them know it's on the way. And that would kind of trigger them to go and check their mail. And maybe that would speed things up a little bit. And if you don't send an email, the waiting time could be longer. So that's my 2 cents on that, Andy.
Okay, appreciate that, Dan. Jim or Alyssa, you want to jump in? You're both fairly new, but what's your how do you handle this?
I would agree with what Dan said. I've only really reviewed one plan since I started, but I tried to get a pretty quick turnaround time. I think 2 weeks is pretty reasonable. I think a month is too long of a time. I'd also say that it's actually, I would prefer if you just sent me a PDF copy of the plan in email. It's much easier to review it electronically. I can search terms and much more quickly review it electronic form. I can always print it out after the fact and keep a physical file in my office. So if you're sending one to me, I'd just prefer it if you sent me a PDF.
Okay.
I'd agree with what Dan and Jim were saying. Other than with our turnaround time, I think Shane's district is similar to mine, where we get so many plans that it's almost impossible to get them done in 2 weeks, unless that was the only thing we were working on. So usually, what I'm planning on now is, getting them out within a month. Lately, they've been piling up, especially if you mail them. I only get down to the office in Jefferson, maybe once a week, every 2 weeks sometimes. So if you can send them in an email, we can usually get them processed quicker.
Okay, good to know. Yeah, it really, and it can vary at different times of the year how the workload's going. The electronic version of the plans are fine. We don't require that there be a paper version. It's still written, even if it's written in cyberspace or in electronic form, and obviously that's going to help district foresters expedite Second part of your question, Tyler, once district foresters are, and one other thing, if the plan's incomplete, then that's going to stretch out that time frame. If a district forester needs to send back and say, we're missing some items, you know, and they'll wait for those, that can stretch things out. Same thing if some of the paperwork is not there, that can stretch things out. But hopefully everything's complete at the first try. And then once the district forester sends me, and they don't send me the plan itself, just several of the forms. Once I get it, I don't let it sit on my desk any more than a day or two at the most, unless I'm actually physically not here or not able to check my email. So I move it quickly. However, once I've processed it, it can still be 3 to 4 weeks before the accounting folks actually issue checks and or direct deposits. They only do that 1 day a week, and I believe it's Fridays. So even though I may turn something around on a Monday, it may not get to the folks in the accounting side until that Friday, and they might not even handle it till the following Friday. So unfortunately, there's a lot of lags built into the system. I think patience is a key word when dealing with a lot of things, including any government program. We do our best to not have things sit around or get ignored, but we're a fairly lean division, and we are tasked to do a lot of things. But we'll do our best, and if I think I'll mention it now, once the claim for payment is approved here in Augusta and is sent to the accounting, we will issue an email, a little notice saying, yes, the reimbursement has been approved. And at that point, it's kind of a benchmark. And you as stewardship foresters will get a copy, as will the landowner and the district forester. So it's kind of, you know, it's gotten to that point. And at that point, it'll put a date on there of about a month out and say, if you have not received your payment by this date, please notify. And that person to notify is me. And then if something has fallen through the cracks, we'll fix it. So that's where there's a sort of a check in the system to make sure that things are moving. Any other questions at this point on anything we've talked about so far? Okay, I'm going to move on. This form is called the Landowner Forester Affidavit, and it's in lieu of proof of payment. So there's kind of fine print down at the bottom. I think it might be easier to see it if I show it to you here in where it's stated in the landowner instructions. What we're looking for is proof of payment. Back along, there have been various abuses of this system where people were claiming reimbursement and they had never paid their forester for the plan. So we require proof that payment has been made to the forester. Now, proof of payment can be, or is really, a copy of a canceled check on both sides, or a similar written record generated by the bank clearly showing that the funds of a given amount have been transferred. A lot of folks don't get that anymore, or when they get it, they get it a month later, or maybe they don't get it at all unless they go look for it. So we devised this form to use in lieu of that proof of payment. It's an affidavit, and there's a section at the above for the landowner and a section below for the forester. So this is what I mentioned, that there's this form, if you're using it, and almost everybody does, needs to be signed by both landowner and stewardship forester. And besides some of the same information, you know, what type of plan and who prepared it and when, how many acres, it asks for the total that was paid and a check number or numbers. Sometimes there's a series of checks. You might ask for a down payment or a progress payment and then the final payment. That has to be signed by the landowner and dated, and then similar information from you as the forester, including the amount and a date. If you use this, you do not need to send that proof of payment. But what this is saying is that you'll have that proof of payment if an auditor should ask for it. Again, we don't get audited very often. In fact, in the 14 years or so I've been doing this, almost 14, there hasn't been one audit where anybody wanted to chase the paper trail. But just in case. So by signing this affidavit, the landowner is saying, I'll have a copy of my bank statement or a copy of the canceled check somewhere that I can show if I'm asked to. So again, this is what I'm talking about there. If you don't have the copy of the canceled check at the time that you're claiming the reimbursement, you can use this affidavit form. Now, one other thing about payment. If payment is made in a form other than a check, a notarized statement signed by the forester asserting that payment has been received and identifying the type and dollar value of the payment may substitute as proof of payment. In all cases, we reserve the right to request additional documentation. So payment in form other than a check. Some consulting foresters are, handling money for a stumpage sale, and they'll take the payment out of the stumpage. That's perfectly okay as long as you have a notarized, copy of whatever the instrument is. The maybe a reconciliation sheet or whatever it is that shows clearly that the money was paid. Here this much stumpage minus this cost, so on and so forth. Another thing that's happened in the past, some folks have traded for the value. The barter system has been used. People have traded for things like gravel, handmade furniture, firearms, a snowmobile. So again, we need a notarized statement saying that, this item valued at this much dollars was offered to pay for the plan. So we can accept that. And every now and then people still pay in cash. And one time that happened, and somebody sent in a photocopy of a bunch of $100 bills, which is interesting and kind of comical, but I'm pretty sure it's illegal to copy money like that. So anyway, that doesn't work. We asked instead that we have a notarized statement saying that it was paid in cash. Okay, here's a copy of that landowner pledge. I think I mentioned it earlier. This is a requirement of the plan, and what I highlighted here was that by signing it, the landowner understands that Maine Forest Service may contact them for the purpose of monitoring the implementation of the plan, either by a site visit or other means of communication. We do a random draw of landowner plans every year, and we check to see how they're doing implementing the plan, what, if anything, recommended in the plan has been done. And if you haven't been able to do it, if the landowner hasn't been able to do anything, we don't, we don't ask for the money back, or we don't spank or scold. But we do want people to understand that, they might be contacted about this. And ideally, it could be an opportunity for another site visit, walk and talk. But the way schedules go, and particularly with COVID, most of these have been done by, phone or email. Okay, it's time for a break. So I'm going to see if I can stop sharing. Or maybe I'm not going to stop sharing, but now I can see everybody. Are there any questions right now about anything we've covered?
Sure, John here. This is more of, I don't know if it's a question for Andy or Dan or one of the state foresters in regard to walk and talks. How many walk and talks do state foresters conduct in a year, kind of on a, like, I guess, not conglomerate, but kind of like statewide? How many about do they do? Any idea?
I'm going to say, I'll say it varies a lot, but now I'll let the actual district foresters speak up.
I guess I can't say on a year wise because I haven't been here that long, but I've been averaging 3 to 5 a week since this summer. It's slowed down a little bit now that we've gotten the snow, but I've even had to make accommodations where I'm doing a half a Saturday a month to accommodate people who, you know, work 9 to 5 and it's dark by the time they get home. So we do quite a few each week. I guess one of the guys, it's Dan, you've been here longer. Maybe you can speak to how many you do a year.
You there, Dan?
Yeah, I took my break a little bit early, sorry. The question was, how many plans do I review a year?
No, more about walk and talks.
Oh, walk and talks. Well, Aroostook County, I think we probably have fewer than what Alyssa sees in her district. I would say in the summertime, probably 2 a week, maybe. Right now, it might be 1 a week, but I also, I don't know if I work with loggers more than Alyssa, but they tend to have me out on job sites quite a bit to walk harvest blocks with them and things like that. So I think what the duties of the district forester are vary a little bit from, of course, we have standard duties, but how much time we spend on each particular thing varies across the state. So obviously my number of walk and talk is going to be a lot different than Alyssa's and a lot lower. But this time of year, maybe 1 a week. In the wintertime, I'll probably have none or very, very few. In the summertime, I'll have maybe a couple a week.
Okay.
Thanks.
Yeah, I'm similar in sort of the demographics of my district, mostly Piscataquis County. You know, since I started in September, I've probably done 6 or 8 walk and talks. So it's not a significant part of my job currently. Hopefully in this summer, you know, when I be here for a full summer, hopefully it'll be more, but the time will tell for me.
Yeah, and from time to time, John, we do a little bit of focused outreach in an area to remind people that the district forester is available. So sometimes we get little surges based on that. But as you can tell, it does vary kind of widely, depending on where in the state you are. Tyler, did you have a question?
Yeah, I was just going to ask how, I think you kind of answered it there. So it's the landowner or the forester logger reaches out to request a walk and talk, or is it sometimes the other way around where the district forester knows there's a plan and offers the opportunity to do a walk and talk?
Basically, the walk and talk can be independent of a plan. Sometimes the walk and talk is what leads to somebody applying for a Woods Wise plan, or maybe not. They may get a plan that doesn't go through the program, or maybe a plan is not really appropriate right at that time. So walk and talks are part of the broader Woods Wise effort, if you will, but they're not directly tied to plans.
I think the only time I've called someone and suggested a walk and talk is when we're doing the forest stewardship monitoring, and it's brought up that they haven't had anybody walk their property in 3, 4, 5 years. And I just, you know, suggest that I come out and take a look and see how they're following their plan and make recommendations on how they can meet their objectives with that current plan or if it needs to be updated. But I don't really go through my list of completed plans and call people.
I'll add one thing, Andy, and that is when I do a walk and talk with somebody, if there's anything that they could use a forester to help them with, whether it's a plan or a harvest or any kind of forestry treatment, I always refer them or make the stewardship forester list available. So by participating in this training and getting on that list, in my mind, that's probably helpful for your business too, because I do make that available to the landowners that I work with. However, I have a small group of consulting foresters in southern Aroostook County, and I maintain a separate list of all the ones that work in that area. But I do always make the complete list available to folks. So I think that just having your name on that list is going to be helpful for you folks.
Okay. Any other questions? Was everybody able to see all the slides and hear me okay? Good.
Yes.
Okay, good. It is just a little odd to do this. It kind of feels like, when I don't have faces there, but that's okay. And of course, it's just a general rule of thumb. If you have a question about the program, any aspect of it, you can call me or call your local district forester or the local district forester for where the woodlot is. We all more or less will say the same thing about it, hopefully. So I think I'm going to try to get going again. One thing I'll say is during the break, I grabbed the screenshot of the participant list. I did get this approved for credits with SAF. Apparently, the way I wrote the agenda, they only gave 1.5 hours of credit. Typically, we've gotten 2 hours for this, online version. Hopefully, the half an hour difference won't be critical to anybody. I might have to do something. I think they're getting very very picky about, like, time spent on introductions is not considered creditable or something like that. I know they take breaks out. So anyway, but I should be able to send all of you a certificate for the 1.5 hours of SAF credit, which is of course also good for your state licensing, Maine licensing credits. So let's see what happens when I do this. Everybody seeing the slideshow again?
Yes.
Yep, I can see it.
All right.
Seeing it here as well.
Good. Moving from the break, now we're going to cover the actual plans, the Woodland Resource Action Plan specifications. As I said, in 2016, we went through these and made some changes. And as you'll see, certain parts of this, we provided a lot of boilerplate, if you will, that you can copy and paste for an individual plan and just either fill in a blank or make minor adjustments. But it's not a template like that. There's only certain sections that are like that. See, there's something else I was going to say about that, which now escapes me. But at any rate, we'll move ahead. So first thing I know what I was going to say. This is available online. There's a link to it on that right-hand column on the WoodsWise Incentives page as a Word doc, and it's open source. So even if you're not writing a plan specifically for WoodsWise, but there's a section of this that you find useful or close to useful for something you're doing, it's absolutely okay to grab it and use it. As I said, we recognize, maybe we can't count it, but we can certainly recognize that there's a lot of good stewardship that happens that's not captured, through the procedures of this program. So just keep that in mind, that all of this is there in a Word doc form. There's also a PDF form, I believe. So getting down to it, we do require a cover page. The cover page must have, by the way, everything that is bolded is required. If it's not bolded, it's suggested, recommended, encouraged, but not absolutely necessary. So district foresters understand from their checklist that there's certain things they got to see and other things it's nice if they see it. Landowner name, the mailing address, telephone number or numbers, Email if available. We used to say email was optional on the application. Now it's not really an option. However, there are still a few folks out there that don't use email or just unable to do it. And we will still work with folks based on the, the old-fashioned mailing of things, but we're trying to get as electronic as possible for several obvious reasons. The plan preparer's name, mailing address, and telephone numbers are required, and email if available. At this point, I really only know of two foresters in the state that work with small landowners that don't have an email. Amazingly, there are still two. And that can be a real problem, but we can still work with that. We do require the plan preparation date, the location of the parcel, and at a minimum that means showing the town, the county, and the tax map and lot numbers. If you have other identifiers you want to get into book and deed, book and page from the deeds, or Latin longs or things of that nature, you can, but at the minimum on that cover page, town, county, and map and lot numbers. The planning period, which has to be at least 10 years, but can be longer, must be stated. And the expiration / renewal date of the plan must be stated. What we want these plans to be that's why we call them action plans. We want things in these plans to be there to really be useful to the landowner. And one thing a landowner really should be aware of is when the plan expires, when it's no longer, for whatever purposes they're using the plan, when it's no longer considered a current plan. The total acreage of the parcel and the total wooded acreage must be shown on the cover page. The total wooded acreage is for as far as stewardship program reporting purposes. It may not be the same as the classified forest land under tree growth. So this is one of several situations or circumstances where woods-wise is not tree growth. Now, I know, because I know that at least 80, more likely 90% of folks getting woods-wise plans are using them for tree growth. That's great, that's fine. But it's not required for tree growth to use the woods-wise program, and it's not automatic if somebody gets a woods-wise plan that takes care of all their tree growth stuff. Tree growth is a separate program with its own procedures. I'm not going to spend time on that now. That's a whole other workshop. But keeping in mind that there may be wooded acres unsuitable for forest production, for commercial forest production on the tree growth side, but they are still wooded acreage and they count towards that total for stewardship. Landowner signature is optional on the plan itself, but is required on the stewardship pledge. The plan preparer's signature is required on the cover page. Moving on, another general statement, the order, other than we say you have to have a cover page with these certain things, beyond that, the way all these elements are collected, the order they're in, how they're formatted, that's up to you and your clients. We always want it to be that the customer is first. What works for them is number one. Keep in mind that your second customer, if you're doing a woods-wise plan and submitting it for the cost share, for the reimbursement, your second customer is a district forester. So don't make it too hard for the district foresters to find stuff. Jim mentioned using the search function in a PDF can be very helpful. If you're not doing that, see if you can make sure that your headings are prominent, or in some ways that the district forester can find all these elements. So the order that I'm going through them in, which is the way they're listed in the spec sheet, may not necessarily be the order in which you put them in your plans. But we do require a statement of the landowner's management goals and objectives, and that does have to be in a standalone section that's easily found. A lot of times that would be near the front of the page of the plan. Doesn't have to be, though, as long as it's clearly locatable. The stewardship pledge is a part of the plan. and should be included in the plan. Again, where you put it in the plan is up to you, or up to you and your client. A schedule of activities to be implemented during the planning period is a requirement. It's going to summarize the recommended activities that you're going to put in a more of a text section. It's going to identify them or link them to places on the ground, the parcel, the stand, or some other geographic location. This can be a standalone page, or you can include it with other pages. It's preferable, or we encourage that it be prominently displayed near the beginning of the plan. The column headings that I'm going to show you in the template are required, but again, the exact format can vary. But anybody reading the plan should be able to easily find this information. And again, this goes back to the idea that this is a plan for taking action, and there should be one place where it's easy to see in some kind of form that here's the things to do, when to do them, and where to do them. So here's that template, which is included in the Word doc. So you can grab this if you want to use it, or you can come up with a different format. But you need to name the activity, and it should be the same that you use in your section on recommendations and prescriptions. The extent of the activity, whatever the unit is, acres, feet, miles, etc. The recommended time frame. That's your discretion how you set up these time frames, whether it's a month, a year, a series of years, what have you. But we do require that there be a time frame attached to the recommendation. The stand location, and if however you're naming your stands, use the same naming convention, name or number, so that again it's make an easy connection between this this table and the text that's going to probably explain in more detail. A cost income estimation, and by this what we're looking for is giving the landowner an idea. Does this activity going to yield income, or let's say income above cost? Is it going to be a net expense? Will it be a break-even type of thing, or is it unable to determine at this time? So basically, if you're not sure, you can always use that question mark or say unable to determine. But what we're trying to have landowners understand is that, for instance, boundary line maintenance is almost certainly going to be some kind of an expense. Either they're going to pay somebody to do it, or there'll be an expense of time and labor. Whereas a timber harvest, most of the time, should be yielding some income. But some timber harvests are break even, and some timber harvests might even be below cost. So giving the landowner some idea, that helps them determine how they're going to go about implementing, following that recommendation. And then there is an optional column to assign some sort of priority to it. You could number them as the first thing to do, the second thing, whatever. You could assign a high, medium, or low, or if you haven't some other scheme for that's fine, and that's optional anyway. So next big piece of the plan that's required is at least one forest type and stand map. For the parcel, will include the following items: the property boundaries that are correct to the best of the landowner and the forester's knowledge, location of water bodies, including intermittent and ephemeral streams and stream channels that affect forestry activities, and non-forested wetlands. The forest stands need to be on there, and they need to be typed at a minimum as softwood, mixedwood, or hardwood. Most foresters have a more detailed methodology for that, and that's fine. And the non-forest land uses. Now, it doesn't necessarily have to be broken out according to all the different uses, although that may be helpful, and you may be going to do that anyway. But at the very least, you show the areas that are non-forest. And as we said, they could be identified. What I want to say is that forested and wooded wetlands must typically be identified and described as forest stands, not considered non-forest, even if the stocking is low, even if there's no activities to do there. it's still considered forest. And by the way, it counts towards those total acres, which may affect the reimbursement. And if there are any wildlife habitats designated by IF&W that correlate to the the essential and significant wildlife habitat item in the legal considerations, those need to be shown on a map. Also, any specific locations where any area-based rules, regulations, or other legal considerations, for example, statewide standards or shoreline zoning, where any of these area-based rules or regs affect timber harvesting or the related management activities and correlating to items in the legal considerations, those must be shown on a map. Now, if you're thinking that this is going to be one pretty busy map to show all these things on one map, it's fine to have more than one map. The statewide standards maps that are provided by Maine Forest Service work really well as standalone maps to include in the plan, and then you don't necessarily have to show all your, zones or, the areas where they apply on your regular stand type map. To a certain extent, this is up to your professional judgment as to the best way to present this information visually. But again, at a minimum, there's got to be one map showing all these things or one or more maps showing all these things. All maps must include a north arrow, a preparation date, a legend, the map preparer's name or the source, and the map preparer's signature. And that's definitely required for the primary forest type or stand map, and a scale. Now again, you might think, well, of course, all maps have to have all that stuff, right? Well, in the past, we've had some that didn't, so that's why we made it very explicit. These are must-haves. So the land use cover typing on the map must match the stand descriptions, the way you name them in the stand descriptions and on your schedule of activities. Ideally, they got a map in one hand and they've got their schedule of activities in the other hand, and then they have the plan in their other hand, or no, it's on the table, so that once they read that, then they can look at their map and say, okay, that's going to happen over here, and here's my little, short version of reminding me what to do and where. Again, trying to make this thing, this plan usable. In the case that somebody doesn't bring their entire plan with them when they go out in the woods to do something, or they're talking to their forester or logger, if they have the map and that schedule of activities, those would be two really good sort of standalone pieces to use. Additional maps can show soils information, general location in the landscape or the community or the watershed, proposed activity locations. These are optional. And again, recommending to use additional maps where the amount of information makes a single map hard to read. The maps may be electronic or paper or both. Caveat, map preparers who are not licensed surveyors are strongly advised to include a disclaimer such as "not a legal survey" somewhere on the map, or "this map is used for forest management purposes only and should not be considered a legal survey." Or I'm sure some of you folks have other verbiage that you've used to make sure that nobody confuses you with a licensed surveyor. One more thing about the mapping. Our federal reporting requirements, because remember, the dollars we use for this come from the Forest Stewardship Program through the U.S. Forest Service. We're required to do some geospatial reporting. So we need to develop a polygon for each plan. So part of the requirements of the plan is to provide information. If you're not working in a GIS system and can't generate shapefiles themselves, then what we'll need is the information for our GIS person, Greg Miller, to create a shapefile. If you are using a shapefile, you can send those in and Greg will review them and verify that they work, and come up with an acreage and obviously a location. We want to make it clear that this map is considered, this information is considered confidential, just like everything else in this plan. Any personally identifiable information in a Woodland Resource Action Plan is protected by state law that protects a lot of the information that we collect from landowners, including on forest operations notifications, if the landowners own less than 1,000 acres. So if your clients have any concerns about confidentiality, you can assure them, or you can simply refer them to me, and I'll assure them that, you know, this is not going to target their woodlot for anything outside of normal monitoring that I talked about earlier. And again, it's going to be done through contacting the landowner. People aren't just going to show up on your land because you send a shapefile into the Maine Forest Service. We're not concerned whether the polygon matches exactly the acreage that you put on your, you know, on your maps, or, you know, in your acreage summaries. There can be a lot of reasons why they're a little different. Again, we're using this for reporting purposes. This is not for tax purposes. If you're using the plan for tree growth for tax purposes, you may adjust your acreage to fit tax acres. I know that happens. And yet there may be more or less acreage out there that the polygon shows up. And again, as long as it's in the ballpark, and particularly as long as the shapefile or the coordinates you send lands in the town that you're saying it should, you know, that's good enough for us. Ballpark, same acres, and land in the same town. That's really what we're looking to do, to verify. So I mentioned other options to meet this requirement, a list of the lat and long coordinates of the corners, the vertices. That can work as long as they're in a consecutive order around the perimeter, and you note the datum. It really helps if you do that to at least send a sketch map showing the, you know, the numbering or the different, you know, the outline of the parcel. Again, if you actually work in GIS, you can provide the shape file. I guess it's shape files. I'll confess my ignorance. I don't really work in the GIS world, but I've seen it done on television. So anyway, then so a lot of folks use Google Earth, KML or a KMZ file should work. Those will get sent in to Greg Miller via, it can be via the district forester. You can send them directly to Greg. It really helps if you copy the district forester so they know it's happened. Eventually this can hang up payment. If by the time everything gets to me, I don't see that the shapefile has been verified, I will hold up my end of the deal until we get that. So keep that in mind. And if you have other ways of handling this that work, we can work with that. Just got to make sure that Greg can work with it. So you see Greg's contact information down there. Many of you probably already know Greg and have worked with him on different things. So at this point, any questions on anything so far? Again, it's not easy for me to see the chat. If you put something in the chat, we'll catch it later. Okay, moving on with the specs. General conditions of the woodlot. A statement or statements describing the type and current condition of physical evidence for each boundary line segment is required. The statements must include an indication of a need to establish or maintain the line segment and the recommended activities to do so within the planning period. So it may be that there's a section of line that needs to actually be established, and then other sections are well marked. So you need to have something said about each leg of the boundary. If you have a bunch of them, like if the lot's beautiful, all 16 of the lines are blazed and painted in a wonderful tangerine color, you can make one statement and say that all the property lines are like that. It's pretty rare for that to happen, but if that happens, you can get away with one statement. But oftentimes, different segments have different conditions. Soils information, at a minimum, must include a listing of the soil series and their approximate extent and locations found on the parcel. The section must include information on the overall suitability of each soil series for growing particular tree species or species group. Now, it's not required to have a map for that, but it's a good idea. And if folks are using the Web Soil Survey, which I've found to be one of the easier federal websites to use, it generates a nice map, and it can easily generate the information that we're looking for. So that's an option. But at the very least, I've got to show the list the soil series and where they are on the parcel. Some statement about operability, the optimum seasons or conditions for forestry activities for the parcel as a whole, or for areas related to the recommended activities. This can be incorporated in a soil section or described separately, or some folks will actually put some of this into their stand descriptions, as long as it's there. And again, secondary customer, as long as the district forester can find it. General property description and history, which must include something about topography, slopes, general hydrology, including the streams or stream channels correlating with the map. Primary past land uses, term of ownership, at least for the current owner, and recent harvests and or natural disturbances. Additional items such as terrain, aspect, watershed location may be added. Again, we're trying to give landowners some idea of what they're working with, what they have to work with. There needs to be some statement about access-related items, including the condition of roads and trails both on the parcel and connecting it to the public road system, seasonal or other limitations to access, whether there are deeded or other rights of way that are part of the access situation. The name of the nearest public or private all-weather road must be included. So under general category, here's an optional thing to break out the acreage to look like a tree growth tax law, a tree growth application, where you break out things like non-forested wetlands, ledges and barrens, building areas, gravel or mining areas, rights of way, roads, agriculture, etc. Again, given how many of these plans are used for tree growth, it's often the case that when you do your acreage breakout, you make it fit the tree growth application, and it's very useful. It's not required to go to that level of detail. Go back to the slide before where it showed what was the minimum for an acreage listing. Now, the nitty-gritty, the stand descriptions and prescriptions. We require a brief statement describing the actual field methods used to develop the plan. We do not make a requirement what those field methods are, but you do need to say what they are so that the landowner or our district foresters or any other person reading this have an idea what these, what your plan is based on. And it may be that you decided to, and your client decided to pay you to go out and take some sample plots. You may make that part of your standard operating procedure, even though it's not required for a RAP. It may be you did an informal walkthrough. My standard, not that funny, but maybe a little funny line is that if you do a drive-by cruise, we need to know how fast you were driving and whether you had the windshield wipers going while you were doing the drive-by. Seriously, not that many people are going to do that as their field method. They're going to walk out on the land. So some kind of statement describing whether you took plots or whether it was just general reconnaissance. Stand descriptions must include a cover type, minimum of softwood, mixedwood, or hardwood. Whatever cover typing methodology or nomenclature used has to match the map and the schedule. The acreage of that stand, dominant tree species and size classes, relative stocking, which can just be high, medium, or low, or you can get into stocking charts. Condition of the understory and regeneration, and a description of stand quality related to current and potential forest products. An estimate of standing volume with an indication of a range of accuracy of the estimate may be included. Not required, but very often something your client will be looking for and something that you may be very comfortable in providing, but it's not an absolutely required element. Other stand-specific information such as stand age, health, growth rates, relative volume, and value of the standing forest products may also be included. There is a required section on forest health that we'll get to in a minute. The silvicultural prescriptions for the planning period, again, this is in bold, these are required, minimum of 10 years, recommended to meet landowner objectives specific to each identified forest stand, including activities to regenerate, improve, and harvest timber as appropriate. If no silvicultural activities are recommended for a given stand during the planning period, the plan must explicitly state that. So if you just leave one out because you didn't intend to have anything happen there, that will not be a complete plan. And the district forester will send it back and say, well, what about that plan, that stand? What's your recommendation there? So even if it's let it grow, you need to make a statement. The prescriptions must specifically identify the stands or stand for which it is written, matching the map and schedule of activities, and be easily located by reference on the stand map. Silvicultural terms will be appropriately used and defined. Sure, you've all run into this, and if you haven't, let me break it to you that a lot of landowners do not talk forester. So keeping in mind your customers, you want to make sure that if you use jargon or a silvicultural term that it's easily defined, and it may be that you'll want to sort of define it in the recommendation to make it clear what it is that's being recommended. So the prescriptions must include the type and purpose of the treatment, the tree species affected or targeted, and some quantitative description of the treatment intensity, such as the number of spacing of the trees that you're going to remove or leave, or your stocking target, or percent crown closure that you're aiming to get to or open up to. Something quantitative to describe how stand structure will change as a result of the prescription. The prescriptions may also include a description of intended outcomes, such as an expected volume yield or a value yield or something like that. Not required, but again, where this is an action plan, if harvesting is recommended, it can be very useful to your client to have that information in it. Here's the forest health section that I talked about. This has to be a standalone section that describes the known presence or absence, and if present or imminent, the current or potential effects of invasive plant and insect species, other native insects and diseases that may affect your forestry activities, damage from past weather events and or equipment operation, other forest health items affecting landowner goals and objectives. Include any recommended actions to manage, control, or monitor specific threats to forest health. These items may additionally be incorporated into the stand descriptions and prescriptions as appropriate. But again, we are definitely looking for a standalone section dealing with forest health. Included a little reference here to our Division of Health and Monitoring, the folks at the Bug Lab, for this. There's information there, info sheets on various insects. Let's see, did not include here the link to the Maine Natural Areas Program, which is where you can find information on invasive plants. However, that link is included in another part of this presentation. And invasive plants is a big deal and getting bigger, unfortunately. Okay, needs to be a section on best management practices for protecting water quality. The ones that you're recommending must be described. The ones that are specific to the recommended activities and/or recommendations to repair pre-existing conditions. Like you're going to use that old woods road, but the crossing needs to be fixed and it needs to be ditched. Otherwise, the existing bad condition will persist and get worse. If there are no specific best management practices recommended, a statement to that effect is required. So again, can't ignore it. Maybe there is no water to deal with on the property, and that's great, but just say so. Details such as culvert sizing or exact water bar placement, things of that nature, that's optional. Sometimes these become addendums or sort of standalone harvesting plans that are separate from the management plan, or it can be included. It is required to have a statement about desired future conditions. This can be done on the parcel, stand, or a compartment-specific basis, depending on how you organize things. The statement of desired future conditions as applicable to at least the planning period or beyond, which may include some or all of the following elements: a future forest type, size class or age, structure, forest products and grades, species composition. It can include desired recreational or habitat or aesthetic, other landowner desired outcomes. This can be contrasted with the likely future condition if no action is taken, or they can be the same if it's appropriate. Other recommended activities such as wildlife habitat practices or access improvements may also be included in the body of the plan and on the schedule of activities. Alternative recommendations and/or constraints to implementation may also be included. But again, that's a may be, doesn't have to be. But a statement of a desired future condition, at the very least, something for the entire parcel, is required. And I'll point out here that relates back to the Forest Stewardship Program standards and guidelines for these plans. So doing this is part of the reason why we were able to send some money back to landowners. Now, the legal considerations, fairly lengthy section. This is a template, these next few pages. You can cover these items in a different order, in a different way, in different sections of the plan. However, all of these items have to be addressed as indicated in the body of the plan and presented in a readily accessible way. So you can think about how to do that. One way to do it would be to copy and paste this part of the plan as a template. And as you'll see, there are ways to just use this template and say is or is not, or does or does not, or yes or no. The plan should not include the laws in their entirety, but must include or summarize the applicable parts of laws that are pertinent to recommended forest management activities on the parcel. You can reference this back to an appendix, other documents, publications, or website, but at a minimum, these items must be addressed in the body of the plan. And we say that because we want to make sure the landowners see this. And sometimes appendices don't get the attention that the plan itself gets. If there are any deed restrictions, and so the statement, the property is or is not subject to deed restrictions which affect forest management activities. Pretty simple if the answer is not. If the answer is, then somewhere you need to summarize the deed restrictions and their effect on the forest management activities. Same for easements. Are there easements that affect forest management activities? Statement as to whether the lot is in the tree growth tax law. And if it is, then this is sort of a reminder that the primary landowner goal for the acres classified under this plan has to be growing trees to be harvested for commercial use. And that the plan includes activities to regenerate and improve and harvest the standing crop of timber, which fans of tax bulletin number 19 will recognize as a direct quote. If the answer is no, then it's a simple check. Regarding tree growth, and again, WoodsWise is not the same as tree growth, but many WoodsWise plans are used for tree growth. When district foresters review WoodsWise plans, they're not doing a tree growth review. This is different than when a town requests that, and they provide a landowner's forest management plan, and Maine Forest Service may look at it with that sort of those lenses on. However, district foresters will and definitely have pointed out that this is a tree growth plan, but your objectives start out with wildlife habitat. So what they're going to point out is that you may be doing your client a disservice if and when they are, if their plan gets pulled for review by local assessor. So while WoodsWise is not the same as tree growth, we recognize that there's a definite correlation there, and we want to make sure that if someone's using it for tree growth, that they're using it properly. The Forest Operation Notification and Landowner Report, which is part of Maine Forest Service rules in Chapter 26. So basically, this statement is either no timber harvesting where a fawn or a landowner report would be required is recommended, or yes, a timber harvest is recommended, therefore a forest operation notification must be submitted. Then it goes on to say that forms may be obtained. So this is the heads up to folks that they as landowners are responsible for that. Ideally, they're still working with you when they harvest and you're there at the time, but as we know, sometimes that's not the case. And also the heads up about that confidential landowner report that comes in January of every year, that they have an active notification. Also, in the template, we include the link to Chapter 26 rules, if anybody wants to go there. Any clear cutting restrictions, that's rules in Chapter 20. Indicate one of the following: this management plan does not recommend any harvest activities which would result in clear cuts under the Chapter 20 definitions, or it does. And if it does, summarize the activities and state the actions needed to comply. So there are Category 1 clear cuts where there's no action needed to comply, but then you just would state that. But we want landowners to know where their harvesting fits or not, how it relates to the Forest Practices Act. And again, there's a link to Chapter 20 rules. When it comes to water bodies, there's a lot there. This is a boilerplate you can use that talks about the Erosion and Sedimentation Control Law, the Protection and Improvement of Waters Act, and the Natural Resources Protection Act. References BMPs again. And then here's the required part of the statement, whether it's located in the municipality that has adopted statewide standards, or it's not in a municipality that has statewide standards, but is in one that enforces its own shoreline zoning. And then there's a little explanation of what, who's in charge. Notes that with statewide standards, in some cases, the option 2 towns, local code enforcement share some of those responsibilities. So a little bit of a heads up there. And if the parcel's in Land Use Planning Commission territories, townships, then LUP standards regarding timber harvesting will apply. So again, if there are forest management activities that are going to be affected by any of these, you need to summarize the rules that affect them. And if there are no activities subject to any of these, then just say so. And here's a link to the complete Chapter 21 rules and the complete Chapter 27 rules. The note here: activities involving cutting trees for reasons other than timber harvesting, such as clearing vegetation for development or associated with residential uses or conversion to agriculture, are regulated by DEP and local code enforcement or the LUPC. So that gets to that whole thing. When is it timber harvesting and when is it not? Not going to talk about that now, but if you've got a question about that, your district forester is a good resource. And this might even bring about one of those site visits we talked about. Again, there's something about if the woodlot is subject to LUP standards, then there's that set of rules. If it's not, it's a simple no. Again, link to the rules. The essential and significant wildlife habitats, such designated by Department of Inland Fisheries. There may not be that are there. There may be some that are there or very close to the parcel, but they do not provide any limitations on activities recommended in the plan. We still want landowners to know that those habitats are on their property, even if it doesn't have a specific effect on what you're recommending. You need to summarize the habitats and cite the source of the information. Most generally, Maine Natural Areas Program, their forest management plan checklist is the source, and it's a very good source, and it's a very easy way to deal with this particular element of the plan. Beginning with habitat is another way to do it. I think beginning with habitat, I was going through some changes on the website that I'm not sure if that'll make that easier or not, but as of now, Maine Natural Areas Program is still doing forest management plan reviews and providing a checklist and a map if anything shows up, such as a deer wintering area or wading bird and waterfowl habitat, etc. And that is really a great way to handle this situation with respect to a forest management plan. They'll also let you know if there's any threatened or endangered species, and if there's any anything that whether they're there or not. They may be there, but again, have no limitations on the activities recommended, or there might be some limitations. Liquidation harvesting doesn't generally apply to folks that are getting woodland resource action plans, but if it does, well, I should say it needs to be addressed, and generally the answer is no. The piece for local ordinances, always want to make sure that landowners know that there could be local ordinances that go over and above. Of course, if it's a statewide standards town, they cannot have water, shoreland type zoning ordinances that are any different from the statewide standards. But there can be other rules. There are some towns that require permits for timber harvesting, some towns that apply shoreland zoning type restrictions across the whole town. Bowdenham. Oh, I wasn't going to mention that out loud. And they may have changed it, but the last I looked. Anyway, so some reference to local ordinances is required. You can simply say property is subject to following restrictions and summarize them, or you can say at this time there are no local ordinances regulating forest management activities on this property. And a suggested statement of a disclaimer. This was a result of several stewardship foresters saying, hey, we're not lawyers. We can't give legal advice. And that's agreed. So the statement reads, and again, this is suggested, you can come up with your own version. Regulations can change, and it is the responsibility of the woodland owner to comply with the regulations in effect at the time any forest management activities are conducted. The landowner should engage a private consulting forester to oversee the implementation of these activities as appropriate to ensure compliance. The information in this plan does not constitute legal advice. So again, if you feel this statement works for you, you're welcome to use it. If you need to adjust it or have a better one, that's fine too. Okay. Any questions on legal considerations or anything else up to this point? All right. Sorry, we're going to run a little over. My apologies, but This is the last piece right here. These things are called long-term resource considerations. They must be addressed because they're required under the National Forest Stewardship Program standards. And by the way, if your client is using this plan for a tree farm, pretty much all these standards are also tree farm standards. Those two standards look very similar. Standards state, the extent to which management plans address these elements depends on their prevalence on the property and their importance with respect to the woodland owner's objectives. Nonetheless, the ones that are bold are required. You need to address wetlands, woodland legacy planning information, historical, cultural, and archaeological sites or other special sites. This can be addressed by describing the location of the woodlot with special significance to the landowner or the community, such as a scenic view, a special tree, a special spot. Sometimes there's cemeteries, old headstones, things of that nature. There may be nothing like that. Again, a statement to that effect. Other long-term resource considerations that must be addressed: protection from fire, soil and water quality protection, biodiversity, fish and wildlife issues, and this can be handled by describing landowner identified interests such as a deer habitat or stocking fish or birding or what have you. Something about monitoring, something about recreation. And again, this might be near and dear to the landowners' hearts and part of their stated goals anyway. Something about aesthetic quality, something about carbon sequestration and climate resilience, and something about forests of recognized importance, which we'll get to in a second. Agroforestry is kind of on that list in the Forest Stewardship Program. We did not include it here because primarily agroforestry is not part of most Maine woodland owners' objectives, but a farmer may very well have some agroforestry practices going on. And even somebody who doesn't think of themselves as a farmer might be doing something that would be considered agroforestry. So that's an option. Now, these are sample statements, and this is, again, more boilerplate that you may use as is. You may tweak them for you or your client's better understanding or purposes, or you can ignore the boilerplate entirely and write your own statement for each of these elements. And what we've tried to do is make the boilerplate kind of like a for more information section. So the links in these are places that a landowner can pursue more information, even if you don't want to put a whole lot more in the plan. These might just be heads up to the landowner. If if woodland legacy planning is something that you're ready to do, here's some information. On the historical, cultural, and archaeological sites, here's a reference to the Maine Historic Preservation Commission. In the early days of WoodsWise, this was a requirement. It's no longer a requirement, but it is possible to send in a map to Maine Historic Preservation, and they will do some searching and send you back a map, perhaps showing that there were old dwellings in a map, something had been mapped on that property from the 1800s or what have you. The last time we checked, they still were operating strictly with paper, and they had at least a month turnaround time. But keep in mind, it's not a requirement for RAPs. It's an option. Now, if you're doing this for a tree farmer, it's a strong suggestion to contact MHPC as a way of meeting the tree farm standards. The carbon sequestration and climate change piece, of course, nowadays, this is kind of back in the forefront in the conversation, and there may be lots of good sources of information about this. At the very least, there is something on the Maine Forest Service website. We have a link here. We also have a link to the Climate Smart Land Network, which provides pretty good information about that and so-called climate resilience. Again, you may be plugged into other sources, and that's fine as long as it's not ignored. The Forests of Recognized Importance piece, the short answer is there are no forests of recognized importance in Maine. So we've got verbiage here you can look at. You can include some or all. The Maine Tree Farm Committee has determined, and there's a statement on the Tree Farm website that we repeat here. After careful consideration and research, the Maine Tree Farm Committee has determined that no forest of recognized importance currently exists in the state of Maine. So you can just put that in there, and that takes care of it. And the reason is that FORI, or forests of recognized importance, are generally big forested areas with global significance and or watersheds that supply drinking water to a major metropolitan area such as New York City. So Canada lynx habitat is not a FORI. Deer wintering areas are not a FORI. And believe it or not, Portland is not considered a major metropolitan area by the folks who come up with this stuff. So it might be bigger than you care to deal with, or not. But bottom line, there are no FORI in Maine. However, you need to say that there are no FORI in Maine. All right, home stretch. Common issues in RAP preparation and process. Make sure the application is approved before you start work. We try to approve those applications quickly, usually a week to 2 weeks turnaround on the application side. Don't start beforehand, because if something happens and we can't approve it, landowner could be caught holding the bag for expenses that will not be reimbursed. And definitely make it clear to your landowners that if you've already written them a plan of any kind, that they can't send in their application after the fact and ask for money for it. It just doesn't work that way. The application has to be approved before the work starts. Use the RAP checklist, which is included on the website as part of the specs. That way, small stuff hopefully will not be left out. And that's the checklist that district foresters are using. Sometimes using the checklist, you'll just want to add 1 or 2 sentences to complete an item. Oftentimes that desired future conditions piece has been hard to find or poorly explained. So try to develop some good language for that. And again, you can go back and forth on that with your district forester to help get it right or right enough. Make sure the silvicultural prescriptions have all the elements that are required. The checklist will help you with that. One way to think about that, the way you write that prescription, is could somebody else take that prescription and apply it if, under the circumstance, you're not the person that is doing that. The plan prepares signatures on the cover page and the map. Shoreland zones, or well, we use that term even for statewide standards. Those areas need to be shown on a map. And of course, the tree growth tax law stuff that I have already talked about. And I also mentioned landowner name and address on the claim form. If it doesn't match the application, it's going to slow things down. As always, keep in mind who your audience is. We talked about that in terms of use of jargon and organizing the format of the plan. It's been suggested that people don't read large blocks of text anymore, or they have a hard time with it. So using short paragraphs, a lot of headings and subheadings, bullet lists, that might be helpful as you format your plans. Do a jargon check. Pictures are always nice, particularly if they're actually of the woodlot. This is the Stewardship Forester Agreement. Just because you sat through this training doesn't mean you have to fill one of these out and sign it, but if you do want to be included on the Stewardship Forester list, you do have to fill this out. I think we have made this fillable too. Not 100% sure without checking, but however it is, if you fill it out, sign it, and send it to me by either electronic means. You could scan a paper copy or send me the paper copy in the mail. Once we get it, we'll list you on the list, and we'll use the contact information as you put it here. So basically fill this out the way you want people to see your name and contact information. And that is that. Just before I get out of the slideshow, any questions on anything that I might want to go back to a slide on? Hearing none. Everybody still with us?
10-4.
Yes.
All right, excellent. Thank you. We're not too far off. Checking the, oh, I was breaking up. Hopefully not too badly. I apologize.
No, you came back.
Okay, good. Was there anything particular that you missed that you want me to quickly go back over?
No.
Okay, great. I kind of ran this myself without tech support. Hopefully the recording will work. And as I said, we'll post the recording, and I can certainly post that, the PowerPoint, so that folks will be able to find it for reference. Your district foresters are your probably first best go-to for questions about the program, and or myself. What I was going to say was, normally if there's somebody sort of running tech, they'll see that hand up or see the question in the text. But luckily, I think we got through it. So last call for questions, comments. Seeing none, thank you again for the time. I should be able to generate, I said, a certificate showing the 1.5 credits, and I'll send those to you so you'll have it for your records. So hope you have a great rest of the day, the week, the year. Good holiday season. And we'll talk to you all later.